Hi, my name's Catherine from Crime Psych. In this video, I am going to be given a psychological analysis of Samuel Little. You may have seen in the news lately that Samuel Little has recently been confirmed as America's most prolific serial killer in history. The number of victims surpasses all previous ones from all other serial killers, including that of Ted Bundy and Gary Ridgway, who is otherwise known as the Green River Killer. He was the previous most prolific killer who killed 49. Samuel Little has said that he'd killed 93 people over a period of 35 years. He admitted to this when he was already serving a life sentence in 2012 for the murder of 3 women. Little admitted these extra murders to Ranger Holland during a series of interviews because he wanted to be able to move prisons. He killed all of the women by strangling them to death. Little was able to recall the details of each of the crimes in great detail, and he even drew portraits of some of these women. These portraits that he drew were so accurate that some of the victims' family members were able to identify their loved ones from them. From a psychological point of view, this reveals quite a lot about the offender. Each and every single one of these murders was a great pleasure to Samuel Little. He's likely to have relived each attack in his own mind again and again. We know from studies within psychology that memories fade over time. However, when events or episodes are recalled multiple times over a period of times, the memories become much easier to recall. And Little's vivid memory of the events years after they've occurred indicates that he has thought about each and every single one of them in detail and often over the years. Before we go on to talk about some of the murders, it's helpful to examine Samuel Little's life in general a little bit. Investigators have suggested that he was born to his mother, who was a sex worker while she was in prison. He was born in Georgia in the USA. Then he moved to Lorraine, where he was mostly brought up by his grandmother. It's said he was frequently in trouble at school and that he wasn't a very high achiever academically. In one interview that he gave, he recalled that when he was about 4 or 5 years old, he said that his school teacher would rub her neck while she was teaching him, and as in his words, it made him hard. As he said in his own words, we'll show you the following clip now.
So why do you think you became what you are?
You know what? I try to trace back to when I became attracted to a woman's throat.
Right.
I remember going to school in Lorraine, but I noticed that when I was in school, 4 or 5 years old, the teachers met. She turned me on, made me dick hard. I know she used to do it like this.
Oh, she rubber that?
She'd be teaching me, yeah. What attracted that shit to me?
This is an extremely young age to intentionally get an erection as a response to being sexually stimulated. Of course, males can achieve an erection from a very, very young age. However, they are more likely to occur randomly rather than as a result of stimulation. I would be more likely to suggest that this was more of an emotional attachment than a sexual one for Samuel Little. In-depth details aren't available on what his character was like during his formative years. The only thing that is reported is that he had problems with discipline and achievement at school. Little says that he was about 30 when he started killing. And this is consistent with one study of American serial killers that found that the average age of serial killers was 28. Samuel Little was arrested and charged with breaking and entering at the age of 16, and he was sent to a young offenders institution. At the age of 21, he was sent to prison for 3 years for burglary. And once he was released from this sentence, he began to travel extensively. He moved to Florida in his late 20s, and he reportedly worked as a cemetery worker and, in his own account, as an ambulance attendant. During his 20s, Little had many encounters with law enforcement and was arrested for numerous offences such as driving under the influence, shoplifting, solicitation, armed robbery, aggravated assault and rape. Detective Saiga of the Mississippi Police Department told a reporter from the Cleveland Metro that Samuel Little's whole thing was about shoplifting. The detective had said that he would work at shoplifting in a city for 3 or 4 days and then move on. He would go out and sell drugs and steal items and sell them from the back of his car. And once he was done doing that for the day, he would then go out early hours in the morning and look for women, according to this detective. Although I don't have the specific details about the order in which Samuel Little carried out these crimes, I would suspect that he began with the smaller crimes and progressed on to the more serious ones over time. He's likely to have chosen the non-contact crimes at first, such as shoplifting, or maybe even peering through windows, looking at women, and then moving on to more violent crimes such as armed robbery and assault. Then, the violence is likely to have been combined with his fascination for women by carrying out the assaults and the rapes which he reportedly carried out. Psychologically, this is a man who is simply taking the things that he wants in every aspect of his life. He very clearly had no respect for the law from a very young age. His crimes, as I said, would have progressed in seriousness and become more violent over time as he gained more confidence in his abilities. He only had minor consequences as a result of his offending activities, and this is likely to have fueled his confidence over time in carrying out these crimes. He kills all of the victims by strangulation, and so he enjoys being close to the victims as he takes their lives. He chose his victims very strategically. Little chose vulnerable victims who would be less likely to be reported missing. The majority of his victims were women who were prostitutes or drug users. He moved from state to state, and this also meant that he was less likely to arouse suspicion in any one particular place. He first faced charges for murder in 1982 in Mississippi for the death of Melinda Lepre. The jury didn't indict him for this crime. However, while he was under investigation for this crime, he was transferred to Florida for coming under the suspicion of carrying out another murder of Patricia Mount. However, due to the mistrust of the witness, he was acquitted for this murder. Psychologically, this would have been a huge boost to Samuel Little's confidence. It would have reinforced to him that he was selecting the right type of victims to kill. Due to drug use and prostitution, he knew that even if these people were reported missing, even if he was identified by witnesses, he could and did still get away with it. Just 2 years later, in 1984, Little was arrested for kidnapping and beating and strangling another victim. 1 month after this, the police found him in his car with an unconscious woman who'd also been beaten and had been strangled. And very shockingly, he only served 2.5 years in prison for these crimes. Again, this would have only served to reinforce to him that he could continue to do this to women and get away with relatively light consequences to his actions. The fact that Little travelled from state to state also allowed him to continue to murder and to attack women. If one police force had known that all of the background information on Little and all of the women who'd gone missing, he wouldn't have been as likely to get away with such light sentences. It wasn't until 2013 that his DNA was linked to 3 attacks and he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment for these 3 murders. A few months after this, the police announced that he was being investigated for dozens more murders. Samuel Little had confessed to a number of murders to authorities because, as I said earlier, he wanted to move prisons. There is quite a lot of footage of Samuel Little talking about some of the murders which he'd committed. He has been more than happy to give details about each case. So far, 50 victims have been confirmed to have been killed by him, and investigations into the remaining cases is currently ongoing. Samuel Little described his crimes in painstaking detail. Sometimes he can be seen smiling or laughing in the videos. Little appeared to have very little or no remorse, and he even showed excitement as he talked about these killings. Take a look at what I mean by this.
When they die, they're all your favorites.
Yeah.
They all belong to you.
What?
I lost track.
Yeah.
I count by states.
Do you think there's more out there that you kind of forgot about, or do you think that this is
No, I ain't got none.
Are any bodies buried anywhere?
That didn't waste no time digging bodies.
How many people do you think you can draw on their face?
I can draw from memory.
How many states, different states, you think?
Florida, Georgia, come all the way up. East Coast, come down to Ohio, Indiana, come down Illinois, all the way down Mississippi, then go across, come back up until you get to California. Los Angeles,
How many in LA?
I'd say about 20. I ain't never lost control, and I always was very cautious and tried to keep from getting busted. And I didn't pick on that would be missed. Prostitutes. There wasn't no women nurses and civil teachers and all that kind of stuff. That's the reason why I didn't get busted a long time ago.
You like white girls or black girls better?
Black.
Yeah.
I mean, I ain't praising, but I love black girls.
In that section of video, he shows how the victims are of little significance to him. His own pleasure is of much more importance. He demonstrates how he controls and shows ownership over the women by saying that when they die, they all belonged to him. He shows some sort of pseudo-intimacy and affection towards the victims. However, once the victim he talks about were dead, he shows no further interest in them. He gained enjoyment from the killing and the sexual activities that were part of that. However, once these women were dead, he had very little to no interest in them. He described a woman he thought was named Ruth. I'll show you the clip on that now.
North Little Rock. Tell me what that girl looked like.
Oh man, I loved her. I forget her name. Oh wait, I think it was Ruth.
Okay.
She was a heavy set, big old yellow gal, and had buck teeth. It had a gap between the teeth, that's what it was. And she was like honey colored skin, and she had like her hair was not really long. It was.
How tall do you think she was?
She was about 5'7".
How much do you think she weighed?
She weighed about close to 200, about 170,
Pretty big girl.
Yeah.
Right. Now, where did you meet her at?
Okay, down there in the crack house. They heard about 6 other girls were sitting on the porch. The dude selling crack in there. I stopped to go in there. I seen the girls, that's why I stopped. We stayed together 2 days or more. I think it was about 3 days. We was going shoplifting. We went to Sears. We went to Kroger's, and that's where I got busted. Mm-hmm. They took me to jail, and she went and stayed in the car. And the manager of Kroger's, I guess he got tired of her laying on his property in that car. He called the station where I was at in North Arkansas to drop the charges. Mm-hmm. So he can come down and get this gal and car out of here. They cut me loose.
And in that clip, you can see that he smiles and he talks about how the presence of the victim being in his car after he was caught for the shoplifting meant that he was released from custody. And this girl was obviously a drug user. Little talks about spending a few days with her before he killed her. He enjoyed spending time with her and with all of these women before killing them, again indicating that there's some sort of a pseudo-intimate relationship between them. He still speaks about these victims with affection and smiles even when he's talking about dumping their bodies. Samuel Little didn't show any empathy for the pain and suffering that any of these women went through. He simply talks about his excitement and enjoyment and how much he enjoyed it and how much they enjoyed the time with him. He then goes on to talk about a black transgender woman who was one of his victims. He talks about this opportunity popping up. And this suggests that some of the murders were pre-planned and were actually well thought out, whereas others weren't. They just occurred because the opportunity was there. And by this point, he's probably very confident in his ability to kill and his ability to get away with it. Take a look at the clip.
Tell me about Mary Ann.
She's what you nowadays they call a transgender.
She's a black male dressed up as a female. Okay. How tall is she?
Mary Ann's about 5'7", 5'6". She weighed about 135.
Okay.
Maybe 140.
And how old do you think she was?
She was 19.
Okay. And where was she from?
No, Miami, down in Liberty City.
Okay. And did she, you'd mentioned before she had a boyfriend, or she talked about a boyfriend?
Named Wes.
Wes?
Yeah.
And tell me about where you met her at.
I seen her down at the Guar on 17th Avenue, and she had on a short cream miniskirt. Mm-hmm. Cream and red. So then this opportunity popped up. Mm-hmm. Take her to the store.
Right.
Instead of me bringing her back to the apartment, I went down 27th Street. That's going down to Fort Lauderdale, mm-hmm. called the Alligator Alley. It runs into the Alligator Alley.
Right.
But the further out you get, the further you get out of Miami.
Right.
And you got vegetation in there.
Now, how far outside of Miami do you think you were?
It wasn't too far to Miami, right there. I was in my stepdad's car, Pontiac Le Mans.
And where'd you take her to?
Continue down 27. Mm-hmm. Got back on 27.
Going outside of Miami. Okay.
Miami.
Going away from Miami.
Going away from Miami. We got down past the let's say limits. So I continued on toward Fort Lauderdale, and I seen a road going off the main road back into the vegetation on the left side. So I got her out of the car, pulled her out, and drug her into the growth back there, and pulled her deeper into a path. A little path was running somewhere. I don't know where it led it to, but it was running deeper into the undergrowth. It's like Everglades like that. And we ran into some water running. But before we got to the water, the earth was mushy. I turned her loose, and she fell into it face down.
And how far outside of Miami do you think you were?
About a mile, 2 miles.
What year did Mary Ann occur?
72.
Okay, 1972.
In that section, he talks about the victim as being a willing participant in the murder. He states that some of them even had a death wish and were friends with him, and they didn't die being mad at him. He believes that these women would be friends with him today if they were still alive. And this suggests that he is somewhat delusional and thinks that these women have great fondness towards him, and he speaks of great fondness about them, and he believes that relationship is reciprocated in some way.
See, it's a strange thing about these women. A lot of these women, they have a death wish.
They want to die?
Yeah. If they was alive to this day, they'd be my friends.
If they were alive today, all those girls would be your friends.
They didn't die mad at me. They was my friend.
Right.
I didn't hate them, they didn't hate me.
Right.
There is much more footage available of Samuel Little speaking about his victims in the Channel 4 documentary and in the various YouTube clips that are available. In the YouTube documentary, Robert Shrug, who is a forensic psychologist, suggested that these murders can't be traced back to one event, which is correct. He said this is likely to be a combination of rejections and traumas. He said that his mother wasn't present and he's not sure if that she was in prison or working as a prostitute, but she wasn't there, and that this was a big red flag. He'd also said that it's possible he enjoyed the sexual arousal of the act and found an audience that would allow him to initiate those. There has been some suggestion that the killing of prostitutes was some kind of retaliation of acting out because his mother was thought to be a prostitute. However, because of the intimacy and the affection which is involved, I personally am more inclined to think that these killings were more about gaining and keeping and having some emotional connection to these victims and some control over that. Samuel Little chose his victims very carefully. He chose sex workers, drug users, homeless people. In fact, anybody on the fringes of society who wouldn't be missed or who wouldn't be reported missing. And to me, this is the saddest part about this case, because he was right. Historically, in America, if you're a black woman, a sex worker, or a crack addict, then as far as society is concerned, you're deserving of anything horrible that happens to you. People haven't heard much about Samuel Little before this point because his victims are not significant. They're not white women. During one documentary that I watched, Detective Rick Jackman, who's an LA homicide detective, said that it's not that the victims were seen as less human or not cared about, but, and in his words, they put themselves in a position of vulnerability, and so that you don't feel bad for them. Think about that for a minute. He's actually blaming the victims for getting killed. He's actually saying that these people put themselves in a position where they were at risk, and so why should we feel sorry for them? What percentage of women do you actually think wake up one morning and think to themselves, I think I'll go and earn more money today than what I've been able to do by selling my body? It's just not going to happen like that. These women are much more likely to have been forced into being a sex worker. And this can either be by abusive partners or as a result of being trafficked or because of lack of other available opportunities because of them being marginalised groups. Those people who were on drugs are also vulnerable. they're not likely to have begun using drugs solely for recreational purposes. Most addicts use alcohol and drugs as a coping mechanism for some kind of trauma. Are they really deserving of more trauma or even death because they chose to use drugs to cope with their psychological trauma? Society is very judgmental to some groups of individuals. And in discussing this case with general people, some people have commented, oh good, he was cleaning up the streets for us then. These victims were somebody's daughter, they were somebody's mother. Somebody loved these people, and they did not deserve to die because of the abhorrent actions and sadistic tendencies of one man who wanted to go out and kill again and again and again, just because nobody took a look at the evidence or noticed that these people had gone missing. This, to me, is the saddest part about our society today. Just because you have a comfortable life, a house, a job, a family, it doesn't mean that some tragic event couldn't occur to change all that in an instant. We have people who fought for our country and suffered such a massive amount of psychological trauma because of this, and so they drink or use drugs to mask those symptoms, and it's ruined their lives and in some cases left them out on the street. We have women who are maybe trying to flee their own country in hope of a better life and being brought to places like the UK and the USA only to be forced into sex work. I do acknowledge that not all sex workers, drug users and homeless people have this type of background, but it doesn't mean that their lives are worth any less than any one of ours. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I do hope that it makes you think, and I do hope that it makes you less judgmental just because of a particular circumstance or job or the way that some people live their lives. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.